Thank you very much, Jasmina, and thank you very much, colleagues. So, good afternoon, good morning to all. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to deliver a broad overview of the SOCO 2020 to you today. In this edition of SOCO, we look into how agricultural markets and trade contribute to sustainable development. Markets provide the venue for economic growth, but have also social and environmental impacts. These are not always positive. Markets alone may fail to reconcile individuals' interests with those of society as a whole, and with the needs of future generations, which are embedded in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In SOCO 2020, we look at the mechanisms that can help markets make a positive contribution to economic, social, and environmental objectives. The SOCO of this year is structured in the following way. This is a very broad topic, and we choose to focus our policy analysis on significant trends and challenges. SOCO 2020 looks at changes in the volume and composition of international trade, food trade, the evolution of global value chains, the integration of smallholder farmers into modern markets, and the effects of digital innovation on markets, something which today is of crucial importance because the world we are facing. Let me start with the global trends in agriculture and food markets. This slide shows the evolution of agri-food trade between 1995 and 2018. Since the beginning of the new millennium, economic growth, urbanization, technological progress, and policy changes have affected the patterns and composition of agriculture and food trade. The upper panel of this slide shows that international trade in food and agriculture has doubled in real terms since 1995. While high-income countries account for most of agri-food trade, developing countries and emerging economies are becoming more active in global markets. In 2018, their exports accounted for over 1/3 of global agri-food trade. While growth rates slowed down after the 2008 financial crisis and the slowdown in the global economy that followed, trade in food and agriculture remains an integral part of global markets. Trade in high-income countries was relatively more affected by the economic recession. See the lower panel of the slide where we present the growth rates in agri-food trade between the periods of 1995 to 2007 and 2008 and 2018. Low-income countries, many of which export to high-income countries, markets were also affected by the slowdown, although global markets in general remain well-balanced. COVID-19 caused some trade concentration due to the logistical disruptions in food value chains. The economic impacts will likely further rein in on development of global markets. Economic growth, urbanization trends, and changes in lifestyle of technology progress and policy changes shape the evolution of international agri-food trade. These trends also change its composition. Across countries in higher incomes, and urbanization affects the demand for different foods. Higher incomes result in declines in the consumption of starchy staples such as maize and rice, and increase the intake of animal protein, fruit and vegetables, and processed foods. In this slide, you will see that the development process of middle and low-income countries is reflected in the significant increase in the trade in fruit and vegetables and processed foods, for instance. This also reflects the dietary change that are occurring in many countries and which are driven by economic growth, urbanization, and a more general transformation in lifestyle. Indeed, relative growth in trade of these products in middle-income and low-income countries, the length of the bars, was far larger than for high-income countries, which have already gone through these development processes. These developments are associated with economic growth and led to improvements in food security and can generate better health outcomes. At the same time, they can also lead to obesity and overweight. Although there is not still solid evidence of any causal link, there is some associations that we can identify already today, and that's something that we need to look very carefully. So within this changing environment, the global value chains have become an important part of food and agriculture and trade. And this is the second trend we analyze. In this slide, you see the composition of gross food exports into different parts that allow us to measure how much of the market trade takes place within global value chains. First, it's important to define what a global value chain is. A global value chain is formed when production chains encompass at least 3 countries. For example, A country A produces oranges and processes them into juice extract, which is exported to country B. There, juice extract is processed in orange-based drinks and exported again to country C. This is a global value chain. It involves at least 3 countries. Looking at trade through the lens of global value chains helps to understand the value added that is generated by a country for exports. A value chain is no longer one country. It's a combination of countries, and each country will provide value to it. In this slide, the value of global gross exports that is generated domestically and exported to other countries, but not through global value chains, is the magenta area. The purple area is the value added that is exported through the global value chains. That is the value added that is exported and then re-exported. The green area denotes the value that has been imported by countries and then used in production for export purposes. SOCO 2020 presents novel data on global value chains for 160 countries. Over 1/3 of all agri-food exports was traded in global value chains that involve at least 3 countries. And that's something extremely important to understand. The global value chain participation rates vary across countries. Many countries trade more than 35% of their food through global value chains. These are marked with a darker shade blue in this map. Others trade a smaller proportion through global value chains and rely mostly on bilateral trade. See the lighter blue shades. As you can see on your screens, Europe shows higher rates of global value chain participation. This is also because the common market promotes trade among European countries and therefore comply with the condition of crossing 3 countries. Other countries such as Mexico have lower global value chain participation. Mexico trades primarily with the US and Canada outside value chains. Most of its exports cross 1 border and not 3, and therefore they don't correspond to global value chains. This map may change as COVID-19 pandemic affects trade and value chains. Difficulties in transport networks and slowdowns of the global economy may result in a decline in the global value chain participation in the same way the 2008 financial crisis and the recessions that follow affected trade. Also, we know that COVID-19 will change for certain commodities, especially for vegetables, reduce the physical distance because of the importance of horizontal farming and how production of vegetables can become closer to cities. So that's why we believe this map could evolve and we have to keep this map alive. But shifting away from international trade and global value could significantly undermine efficiency gains that are associated with the comparative advantage of countries and sectors. And this is because it's important to understand the composition of the natural resources. Of course, there are cases in which we will gain efficiencies by trade. It's the most efficient way to allocate the natural resources in the way we produce and export. That's why it's so important to keep trade moving and to keep trade flows moving, especially under the current circumstances of COVID-19. Trade brings about efficiency gains as countries exchange goods in line with their comparative advantage. In the longer term, these efficiency gains, together with technological spillovers and the transmission of knowledge through trade, can result in productive growth. These effects of trade are more pronounced in global value chains due to the close linkages between producers, traders, processors, and buyers. As you can see on your screens, there is a positive relationship between growth in value added and growth in global value chain participation for both the agricultural sector and the food and beverage industry. Estimates developed for this report indicate that a 10% increase in agricultural global value participation can on average lead to an increase in agricultural labor productivity of more than 1%. This can boost the domestic economy and contribute to development. Again, see how important is this, especially in a situation like today where we will be facing a recession across the world. Increasing trade and increasing global value chains could accelerate and boost productivity, is something that we need. As a product is traded along the global value chain, each time it crosses a border, it incurs import tariffs. The increased fragmentation of production means that tariffs are incurred multiple times along the value chain. Lower trade barriers can promote global value chains and contribute to growth. In this report, estimates that the increasing global value chains participation through the removal of trade barriers could lead to an increase in the demand for unskilled labor in developing regions. This is consistent to what FAO is trying to pursue, also by promoting intra-regional trade, especially in Africa, where we need to improve food safety to be able to accelerate this movement across borders and to create these global value chains at the sub-regional level. However, For this to happen, we need to complementary policies, investments in infrastructure, effective regulation, and most importantly, measures targeting the upgrade of skills for farmers and workers. This is because we have to integrate the smallholder farmers in markets so that we include them in the development process. It's important and it's crucial for FAO that global value chains are inclusive of smallholders. And indeed, in part 3, we shift our attention to smallholder farmers because we need to include them in this process. They cannot be excluded from participation in the global value chains. Many smallholder farmers in developing countries face tremendous constraints to participate in markets and value chains. This is because the poor communication and transport infrastructure and the small farm size results in high transaction costs and in thin product and input markets. They also result in market failures, price instability, and missing markets for credit and insurance. The typical problems we keep talking about is smallholders. They don't have access to finance. They cannot access to markets because they don't comply with the standards. So a big change and a big transformation is needed. Our data shows that farmers in developing countries only sell part of their production that can often be small. In your screen, you can see that in Ghana, farmers sell on average about 46% of their crop production, retaining more than half for in-house consumption. In Malawi, farmers sell about 21% of their crop production, and in Uganda, about 30%. This low commercialization does not add to the farm income, and women face even higher obstacles to enter the market than men, as you can see in the lower panel figure. Market failures affects farmers' decisions on what they produce and how much they sell, on how they allocate their labor, and how to invest on their farms and technology. Often, the impacts go beyond economics. For example, missing insurance and credit markets affect the decision of farmers to send their children to school. And that's where the big change has to happen. And that's where we need to find ways in which we can resolve these constraints. And that's the core element behind the hand-in-hand initiative that FAO is leading to try to release constraints to farmers so that they can achieve their potential. The emergence of global value chains with their stringent requirements in terms of food quality and safety could further marginalize smallholders. Standards are costly, and if the incentives are not there, and if significant investment is needed and you don't have financial access to financial markets, then there could be bigger constraints, and that's what we want to avoid. In addition to broad policies, inclusive business models such as contract farming can help to address market failures related to price risk, access to productive inputs and credit, and access to technology and knowledge. Our review and analysis show that contract farming can improve access to value chains and generate benefits for many smallholders. Overall, it is estimated that the participation in contract farming could result in significant increases in farm income. Based on a number of studies, the average estimate can be up to 50%. There are many innovative models presented and reviewed in SOCO 2020, and FAO has an online platform on contract farming designs. But contract farming and value chains that integrate sustainability certification schemes can add positive environmental and social outcomes to these economic benefits. The important thing is that these contract farming arrangements have the proper incentives for both the producers and also the companies which are dealing this contract farming, the agro-processors. Incentives need to be proper for both sides to avoid abuse of market power and to avoid any problem of asymmetry of information. Sustainability certification is gaining importance in global markets, especially for high-value products with established links to global value chains. For example, around 1/4 of the global coffee areas are certified through sustainability standards. Growing consumer demand for sustainability-produced products adds environmental and social outcomes to increase in farm income. Sustainability certification can harness markets to contribute towards the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And please understand, contract farming can happen also with farmer groups. Farmer associations is a way of horizontal coordination. Contract farming is a vertical coordination. Contract farming can happen between corporations, agro-processors, and farmers directly, but it can also happen between corporations, processors, and farmer associations, which are coordinated normally through umbrella groups. And that's what we need to learn also, that the same problems are facing both. And we need to find solutions to those problems so that these small farmers can be integrated into the markets and especially into the global value chains. And let me now move to digital technologies. Against this background, digital technologies are rapidly transforming all stages of the value chain. Their adoption is improving efficiency, creating new jobs, generating new income streams, and saving resources. Digital technologies and markets are discussed in the part 4 of this report. And they are playing a crucial role today also because of the surprise of the COVID-19. Today, nearly everyone lives with a range of a mobile telephone signal, regardless of the owning of a device or not. As you can see at the upper panel, mobile telephones and mobile broadband subscriptions grew rapidly and surpassed fixed subscriptions by far. But access, measured by mobile subscription per 100 inhabitants, varies across countries, and this is a dimension of digital divide. And even within a country, urban and rural, we also still observe the digital divide. Digital technology applications can generate significant economic, social, and environmental benefits and accelerate the progress towards achieving the SDGs. The report cites a myriad of examples of technologies applications that promote access to information, particularly on prices, market participation, financial inclusion, food quality and safety, and ethical and sustainable practices. E-commerce platforms may incite educated youth and women to remain and return to rural areas, making an important contribution to social cohesion and overall family welfare. But remember, for e-commerce to happen, we need to have 4 elements. We need to have the platform, we need to have the connectivity, we need to have mobile money, and especially we need to have the delivery system. If we don't comply with those elements, e-commerce won't work. But they are a huge opportunity, and countries need to work on this. Africa, for example, could have the platform, have the connectivity, have mobile money, and we need to have a better delivery system. The same in Latin America. So again, there is a huge opportunity, but also at the same time, we need to have the labor supply ready for that. These new technologies are going to bring a new labor demand, and we need to create the skills on the youth to be able to respond to that new labor demand with the attributes they need to be able to satisfy and to accelerate and leapfrog in the use of digital technologies. Food e-commerce gained space substantially during COVID-19 crisis and is projected to increase significantly in some countries. Blockchain technology can build trust and promote transparency and thus increase the traceability of food through the value chain. This can support the implementation of sustainability standards and labeling that provide information to consumers on environmental and social dimensions of production. We need to work hard to integrate all the attributes of these technologies so that farmers can benefit of all of them and not each one individually in different silos. That complementarity of the attributes of the technology is what will make a huge difference and will help to accelerate, for example, using proper blockchain technologies to improve on traceability and to reduce the non-tariff barriers that we face today in many developing countries, like in Africa, that is restricting the intra-regional trade. A big change is needed, and digital technologies can play a crucial role for this. At the same time, digital technologies also entail a risk and challenges. So it's not only a panacea, it brings risks and challenges. They can be disruptive, modifying or displacing value chain activities and products. In many countries, accessibility is still limited in rural areas, and rural women are a particular large disadvantage. You can see the difference in internet use between men and women on this slide. Public and private actions is needed to close the digital gap. We need to close that gap. It's essential that we take this into account because women can be the catalyst also for the change, and we need to keep them informed. See what happened in Bangladesh with Grameen. The Nobel Prize Unions created this mechanism that empower women through the use of cellular phones. Those are the models that we need to follow to be able to increase access to digital technologies and minimize these problems. But for that, we need to have what we call complements in place to support the process of access to digital technologies. And the complements are the regulatory mechanisms, the institutionality that is needed to make this work and to leapfrog, to learn from the mistakes and to adopt the best practices. South-South learning, North-South learning, and triangular coordination. Issues related to ownership and use of data collected through digital technologies on farm have raised concerns. Addressing these issues can further promote digital technologies adoption. In the longer term, technology will also affect the demand of labor and wages. It could also lead to deviations from competitive outcomes in markets, affecting prices or quantities and therefore welfare. The potential of technology to impact agriculture and food markets needs to be further analyzed. The issues mentioned above point to the necessity for enhanced collaboration between all stakeholders. They will also require a consensus on best practices that can shape a regulatory framework which will make the benefits of digital technology for food and agriculture and minimize the associated risks. We want these technologies to be inclusive. We don't want these technologies to increase market power. We want these technologies to be accessible to smallholders, to be inclusive to them, so that they can live from the profits and benefit from the profits of these technologies. It's essential that those complements that assure that best practices are used are in place. And FAO is doing a huge effort through the International Platform of Digital Food and Agriculture to be able to accelerate this process and work together with countries to bring these best practices and leapfrog, because we understand that they will play a crucial role. They are playing today a crucial role, and we need to make them inclusive to be able to make the change that we want. Please, it's very important. We are under very tight conditions today. We are in a situation that COVID-19 is putting us that is unacceptable. Huge levels of extreme poverty, increasing more than 100 million. Significant increase in undernourishment, up to 132 million people more going to undernourishment. 3 billion people that don't have access to healthy diets. We need to find ways to increase efficiency of our production system, of our global value chains. The worst we can do is to move to policies of not moving commodities around the world. And global value chains are a huge opportunity, as long as they are inclusive, as long as we use the technology in the best possible way, as long as we bring innovation in the best possible way, as long as we bring data, big data, in the best possible way. All these elements, governance, data, big data, technology, and innovation, will help us to create the food system transformation we need. And that's where global value chains will play a crucial role. But for that, we cannot do it alone. We need to partner, and we need to partner with governments, universities, academia, civil society, private sector, and multilateral organizations. It's essential that we work together to create the change that we need so that we can move forward and for once and for all transform our agri-food system so that we provide healthy diets to people, we provide welfare to people, and we improve the life of our farmers and our consumers. Thank you very much. Regarding the first question, I think that one thing that has come very clearly in terms of agriculture and food is that it's a very resilient sector. It's one of the few sectors which still is growing and which has been recovering in many countries, even in my own country, which is decreasing the GDP in minus 14%, agriculture is growing. So it has shown that it can adapt, it can be flexible. We need to keep helping it, and we need to keep helping the sector so that it can keep growing and recovering, and especially to be inclusive. So COVID-19 affected the agricultural sector because of the policies that were implemented initially, which were very restrictive. It was only focused on the health issue, and they forgot about the food and agriculture, which is essential for food security and nutrition security. And that's what changed. FAO tried to push a lot this concept of keeping the food value chains alive during the process of the lockdowns. And countries started to move and change and try to put policies in place, which helped to minimize the logistical problems generated by the lockdown. So logistical issues were important. They were more deeper in the high value commodities because of the need of labor. In staple commodities, it's more capital intensive, but in high value commodities, it's labor intensive. And they were also more sensitive to, of course, transportation, because these are perishables. And that's where we need to increase efficiencies and learn from it to increase resilience. And what that means that we need to be ready for these types of shocks. We need to be preventive. We need to preempt them. That needs to be meaning that we need to have health protocols in place so that we can move fast and assure that the health protocols are in place. Automatization is going to happen, and it's starting to happen, which will create that resilience at a certain level. But also, of course, shortening the physical distances. And that's what e-commerce and digital technologies could help to do. And also it tells us that we need to increase efficiencies. And one of the major ways to increase efficiencies is to reduce losses, for example, in the production process, which FAO has calculated in around 14% by now. So there are many ways in which we can increase resilience, and that's our effort. We also need to be strategic. The recovery will require investment in infrastructure. That's the way countries will try to recover, and that investment in infrastructure will need to be focused in productive activities that will link the rural sector, will link the agri-food sector. And that's where global value chains could play a role, because if we have the market and we help on that, it will be extremely helpful. And finally, what it also has shown is that there is a huge potential on interregional trade. And as some of the ministers mentioned, one of the major barriers to interregional trade is food safety and non-tariff barriers. So we need to find ways to improve food safety through traceability, through using blockchains, through creating, like for example in Africa, the Pan-African Food Safety Entity that will assure that we can accelerate interregional trade, because that will help to move goods across borders and create an additional demand when we face a recession like the one we are facing of developed economies too. What SOCO brings is the importance of the efficiency of the value chains. What SOCO brings is what are the policies that we need to change to make it inclusive. Contract farming is an option, and contract farming, as I mentioned, can happen with corporations directly with farmers, but also can happen with corporations with farmer groups. But we need to innovate. We need to bring innovation. And innovation is not only on technology, innovation is also on the process on how we do things. And contract farming designs needs to be improved, because sometimes they are biased towards the contractor or the one that you contract. The farmer that you contract doesn't have the mechanisms to provide the standards they need. We don't need the contractor to be the one providing the inputs and the credit. We need the contractor to provide the standards that they need and to assure the demand. But the farmer and the farmer associations can get through a mechanism that we can support by bringing the capacities behind, should be able to access to finance and should be able to access and to identify which are the best inputs they need to do. And that requires work, and that requires creating scoring mechanisms for farmers to be able to access to finance. It could require initially some de-risking, some trust funds that could facilitate that process. Like when you build a warehouse receipt system, for example, you can do factoring. You can have a ticket for what you put in your warehouse. The ticket can go to the financial system in an electronic way, and the financial system can pay you a percentage of that, like we normally do factoring in the banking system. But that requires to reduce the risk for these farmers, because this banking system is not used to work with farmers. And that's where we can bring mechanisms and tools like scoring mechanisms, and also some de-risking at the beginning so that the banks learn how to work with farmers so that they can become more inclusive. So a lot of innovations around, and I think that's what this report, not everything will be a combination of short, medium, and long term, but those are the big changes we need to do to create the difference. Thank you. I really want to thank everybody. I would like to thank the team of EST, the trade division, which is led by Ben Bubaker, and by George Rapsomanikis, which have led the development of the SOCO, and all his team. Thank you very much for an enormous, amazing work. Thank you, Director General, for your support and your support in bringing this up as a reality. I believe that this report brings important things into the discussion. It brings the importance of trade, the importance of how we can facilitate trade and to make it inclusive. Normally, we are afraid of global value chains because we normally think that farmers are not taken into account. And that shouldn't be the case. Anything that implies improvement and implies gains of efficiency in the production, in the way we produce, and in the transparency in the markets are good. And the small farmers have to be part of that. And we need to find ways to create the aggregation that we need for smallholders to be able to make them accessible to the standards and to the markets that they are supposed to access. And that's what I think the report tries to bring, finding solutions in which we can create a system of global value chains which are inclusive. That's the way to move, not to exclude. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should be positive to that and trying to bring the needed innovation, the needed data and the big data, and the needed technologies and the needed governance, what we call the complements, the governance to make this happen in the best possible way. The second core message is that clearly the situation that we're living today is a situation that requires a significant change. If we are going to achieve or at least be on track and on path to achieve SDG 2, we need to transform the agri-food systems. And that is something that we need to do. And trade plays a crucial role for that, as also working and increasing productivity within the countries. But trade can be global, and as the director said, it can be interregional and within a country. We see countries that in the south, they have surpluses, and in the north, they have deficits, and they are running significant humanitarian crises. That shouldn't be the case. And it's not only an issue of infrastructure, it's an issue of tolls, it's an issue of many problems, and that's where the complements can play a role. So trade is not only global, it's not only regional, it's also within a country. And that we need to change. We need to put a significant effort in trying to assure that. Because at the end of the line, although the definition of global value chain is moving across 3 borders, You can even move across 3 borders within a country. So that's what we want. We want the food to be available to people. People need to be able to have healthy diets. It's incredible that we have 3 billion people without access to healthy diets. That's not acceptable. It's incredible that we have 2 billion people that don't have access to regular food. And it's incredible that we have still 690 million people undernourished, plus the 132 million people that will come as a result of COVID-19. So again, gaining efficiencies and making food to flow through value chains, and especially through global value chains, is the way to do it. It's the way to allocate resources in the most efficient way. Trade is trying to find the better distribution of the resources. But for sure, as in any activity, we have trade-offs, and there are winners and there are losers. Our job is to bring in the losers, to help them to be part of it. Our job is to find policies to minimize the effects of the losers and to accelerate the process of the winners so that they can also pull in the people that are being affected. We cannot believe that one policy will solve the problem of everybody, but we need to do significant investments to assure that that happens. And that's why we need to look at both and try to resolve the problems of the ones that are affected. And specifically in the case of agriculture, is by making inclusive global value chains. Let me repeat that again, is central to make inclusive food value chains. And finally, the topic of digital technologies. Now, people talk about digital technologies like this is the panacea and it will save the world. They won't do it by itself. They need to comply with several conditions. We need to have connectivity, and still there is digital divide. Normally, it's difficult to look at the numbers when we split them by rural and urban, but there is a significant digital divide. Technology is evolving very fast, and that is helping enormously. We have more cellular phones than populations right now. The cellular phones are growing faster than the population growth, and in absolute numbers, we surpass the population that we have now. But it's not all distributed evenly. Inequalities are there, and that's where the companies need to come. We need to find ways to give access to technologies to all the people, all the farmers, so that they can do the transactions. But that requires also capabilities, how they can use them if they don't know how to write and read, how we can improve the capabilities so that we provide technologies that they can use and that are adapted to their needs. And content. The information we put in these technologies should be what they need to have to be able to implement. We need to find and use this technology in the best possible way. And it's not only for prices, it's for information, for traceability, for making decisions. The warehouse receipt system that we're trying to develop for Africa right now includes that, because basically allow farmer associations to immediately vote if there is a bidding on something to be sold through the warehouse, which before was a big problem, was the big reason why they couldn't be part of the warehouse system, because they couldn't coordinate quickly. And when they were trying to coordinate, others will have win the bid. With cellular phones, we can develop a system that facilitates that process with a simple yes or no. You don't need to know too much. So we need to do those innovations, and we need to adapt them to the reality and to resolve the bottlenecks. And that's exactly what, with the guidance of the Director General, we're trying to do at FAO with all the teams, trying to find ways in which we can bring practical solutions in the field to achieve what we need to achieve, to make farmers profit from their capabilities, from their potential, so that we can help them moving them out of poverty. And moving them out of poverty is not just putting them in the extreme poverty line of 125 PPP per capita. It's putting them in $7 a day per capita so that they are sustainably out of poverty. And that's part of the job. So there is a lot of work to do. I really appreciate this report. It's really bringing new ideas and new innovations and new things to work. And our job is to make these reports implementable. It's not just the report. It's how we make these reports operational, how we work with our friends, our partners from the World Bank, from the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and all the MFIs, which can help to implement these things. We need, every report we do at FAO needs to have an operational plan of implementation with our partners. We are not an investment bank, but we are bringing evidence that we should implement and operationalize. That's how we are going to get the impact. Thank you very much to all.